At the Ataturk Mausoleum in Ankara, the Turkish army, with pomp and circumstance, marked the first anniversary of its revolution. It's the end of 12 uncertain months in which the lives of Turkey's 28 million people have been ruled by the soldiers. Civilians from all walks of life took part in the parade. They were invited by the army, which is anxious to keep close to the people and not to seem dictatorial. University students carried pictures of their comrades killed by the police whilst demonstrating against the old regime. It was these demonstrations that gave the army its cue to intervene. Also present were the army officers who plotted the coup. Once there were 38 of them, but 14 were purged because they wanted the army to retain absolute power. The remainder are the most powerful people in Turkey today. As they paid their respects at the shrine of Ataturk, they gave at least the appearance of unity. Members of the junta are little known to the public. People fear or respect them, but it still takes a civilian to rouse real enthusiasm. The man who got most cheers at the parade was former President İsmet İnönü. He gave the revolution his early blessing and the backing of his own party. Without İnönü's support, the army might have been isolated from the public, in whose name it had ousted the old regime. The main job of the army is not politics but defense. Turkey is a fully fledged member of both NATO and CENTO, the West's military pacts in Europe and the Middle East. Because Turkey borders Russia and guards the gateways to Europe and Middle East oil, the West sees her as a vital ally. That's why she's received nearly $4 billion of American aid since 1948, much of it spent on our huge army of 500,000 men. A fair number of them took part in this enthusiastic combined exercise laid on for Panorama. Many of the officers in the exercise were from the armored unit that played a key part in the revolution. They seemed far more interested in their jobs than in playing politics. Some feared that if the army stayed in power too long, its leaders might split, as they'd already done once inside the junta. Others feared military extremism. Many seemed sincerely to believe in democratic government, but said that this would only be possible when the influence of the old regime had been obliterated. Above all, these officers seemed anxious to restore to the civilians the heavy responsibility of ruling Turkey. The army has tried to prepare for a return to civilian rule by convening a new National Assembly. It's composed of picked men whose job has been to approve a new constitution worked out by civilian experts. After that, the army has promised free elections. The date, several times postponed, is now set for October. As the delegates voted, they were watched from the balcony by a solitary-looking figure, General Gürsel, leader of the revolutionary junta. It's this amiable but tough professional soldier who's become the most powerful single man in Turkey. After an illness earlier this year, he's less robust than he was, but he's still said to have the last word in the junta. Does he never feel that despite his support for democracy, a more authoritarian system might not be better suited to Turkey's needs?
Well, I'm confident and I believe that these difficulties can only be solved by the general will of the nation. In fact, the authoritarian governments tend at first to show some more progress, but at the end they degenerate and they carry things to a bad position.
How can you impose democracy by an act of force? It seems to be a contradiction in terms.
This is not possible, of course. This is like a spring. When the pressure over the spring is lifted up, then the spring will spring up, you see? And that's why we have arranged to prepare the new constitution. And this constitution will be offered to the referendum of the people. And if the people accept this, that means that this is the general will of the people.
But the army will always be in the background as a reminder to the politicians that it's ready to come back if they misbehave.
Yeni tekrar ediyorum, bu abdest bu memleketi 50 sene namaz kıldırabilir.
Well, now I'm again repeating that this lesson is enough for this nation for another 50 years.
Thank you very much, sir.
Çok teşekkür ederim.
The morning boat is leaving Istanbul for Yasyada, the island where 400 members of the old regime are on trial. Passengers are searched before going aboard. Exaggerated security measures are designed to impress the public. The trial has lasted over 7 months. It's a great popular attraction. People have a day's outing on the Alcatraz-like island. They watch their old leaders answering charges ranging from treason to petty corruption. The tribunal, resembling a scene from the French Revolution, is led by the shrewd Judge Bassol. The judge frequently takes charge of the questioning. Chief defendants are former President Bayar and former Prime Minister Menderes. The most solemn charge, that Menderes violated the constitution by planning a dictatorship, is being heard now. If found guilty, his punishment could be death. The army hoped the trial would discredit the old leaders, but their plan has misfired. A good many spectators secretly sympathize with the accused and resent military rule. No one can rule Turkey without the support of the peasants. They make up 85% of the people. They're poor, illiterate, and dominated by the big landlords. They're deeply conservative and mistrust the people from the towns. Menderes played up to their conservatism. He encouraged religion again after its long eclipse. And though he did little to improve the peasants' lot, he did leave them alone. Today, many peasants mistrust the military regime and its reformist ideas, especially its threat to levy income tax. Those of their children who go to school bring home ideas about the greatness of Ataturk and the idealism of Görsel. According to the village elder, this little boy even took the trouble to memorize a speech praising the revolution to declaim to his friends. Yet despite propaganda, most peasants reserve their judgment about reformers from the towns. This deep traditionalism, bred in poverty and illiteracy, is a gift for dictators. And just because it is so hard to create progress in the villages by liberal means, the peasants constitute the greatest threat to Western-style democracy in Turkey. In Istanbul, whose mosques are the glory of Islam, Menderes also sought support by giving money to the church. He made less impact, for in Istanbul, Islamic tradition is weak. Many great mosques stand empty. But Istanbul has more than the tradition of Islam. Its Roman aqueduct, its crumbling Byzantine walls, its monuments to Ottoman power recall many different cultures and ideas. Also, it's here in Istanbul and in Ankara, the only big towns in Turkey, that you find that small minority of educated Turks who demand parliamentary life. Yet, how can Turkey have social and economic progress without using undemocratic methods? This is the dilemma facing the educated few. People like the well-known newspaper owner, Özcan Ergüder.
As a working journalist, how much freedom have you had under this regime in the last year?
I would say complete freedom, certainly more freedom than we ever had under the previous regime. We're quite free to criticize the government, in spite of the fact that it is a revolutionary government. We're quite free to criticize members, individual members of the government, of the committee, and we've done so in many cases.
You're free as long as you don't criticize the government in a basic sense.
As long as you don't make basic criticisms of the revolution, not of the government. You can criticize the government as much as you want. But if you can't very well, you don't really have the right to, and I don't think you can have the right to disagree with the revolution, basically.
How do you, as one of a member of a small educated minority in this country living in the towns, expect democracy to work when the mass of the country is underdeveloped, illiterate, and in that sense very much vulnerable to dictatorship, or at least to authoritarian rule?
Well, I don't think your question is right, really. I don't think democracy is something only a small majority or small minority of intellectuals in this country are after. I think the idea has been sold to the big masses, to the public. Democracy has, in this country, at least a history of about 100 years, 120 years to be exact. I think the idea has been sold to the big masses.
Well, if that's so, why was the revolution necessary? Why did the army have to come in and throw out the politicians?
Don't you think that the very fact that the revolution took place shows that people in this country are mature enough to know what is democracy and what is not, and mature enough to do the right thing for democracy? I think it proves my point, the fact that revolution took place. People used their right to revolt, and they could have submitted to dictatorship. They didn't.
For generations, Turkey's position as the guardian of the channels that link the Black Sea with the Mediterranean have made her internal affairs acutely interesting both to Russia and the West. When Russia wants to send ships into the Mediterranean now, she must sail them through the Bosphorus and then into these narrow straits of the Dardanelles. Here on the European side is the massive Turkish fortress, which once sealed the approaches to the straits against all comers. On the other side is the beginning of Asia, and not far inland, the ruins of Troy, with their reminder of a great past civilization. What I think we tend to forget, however, in the West is that for centuries, Turkey herself was also a great power and a great civilization. And this has meant that today her people are much more sophisticated in their ideas about government and administration than is the case in other Middle Eastern states. They're reluctant to accept a simplified Nasserist solution to their very considerable political problems. Educated Turks are desperately anxious to make democracy work, but whether they're civilians or whether they're soldiers, most of them are still uncertain as to exactly how they can do it.